Our friends of education this year, as different as they are on many fronts, came together and they passed and helped pass the first bipartisan piece of legislation a lot of us can remember coming out of this Congress. And for that, your committee has awarded them, and the board of directors accepted, the Friend of Education, Senator Lamar Alexander from Tennessee and Senator Patty Murray from Washington State.
Thank you. Thank you, Lily, and to the Tennesseans especially, thank you for being here. Thank you for this honor, but I'm really here to honor you, the Classroom Teachers of America, who helped pass the law to fix No Child Left Behind, who helped to reverse the trend toward a national school board, and who helped to restore responsibility for children in 100,000 public schools to the states, to the communities, and to the classroom teachers where it belongs. And I thank you. I thank you for honoring Senator Patty Murray, because without her, it would not have happened. For 15 years, your classrooms have been ruled from Washington, D.C. But last December, as Lily said, a dark cloud has just been lifted from our country. And also, as Lily says, we have to make sure now that things look different for educators in their classrooms. Our job last year was to pass a law. Our job this year is to make sure that the United States Secretary of Education implements the law the way that you helped Congress write it. My late friend Alex Haley once heard me make a speech, and he said, Lamar, when you make a speech, you would say, instead of making a speech, let me tell you a story. Someone might actually listen to what you have to say. So here's a short story. Imagine a fifth grade teacher in East Tennessee, 500 miles from here. Before the new law that we passed, that you helped pass, the United States Department of Education could decide whether that teacher was qualified to teach, whether her academic standards were challenging enough, whether she and her school were succeeding or failing based upon the result of a year-end math test. So as a result, her state and her district required her to spend more and more time administering countless tests geared toward the end of the year test, less time on teaching, and at the end of the year, if her students didn't meet a Washington definition of adequate yearly progress, parents would receive a letter saying, your child goes to a failing school. The last secretary granted some waivers from some of those requirements, but the problem was that even made the secretary more of a national superintendent for 80,000 schools in 42 states, because Washington then had a new system for deciding whether the fifth grade teacher was effective. Standards effectively had to be Common Core. She still had to teach to the test, and the old goals and mandates were replaced by new mandates and new punishments from Washington, D.C. But I've got some news for you. Because of the new law, gone are those waivers, gone is the Common Core mandate, gone is adequate yearly progress, gone is Washington-defined test-based accountability, and gone is Washington, D.C. telling you exactly how to evaluate teachers and whether your school is succeeding or failing. So Lily was right. A dark cloud has been lifted. The No Child Left Behind era is over. The Mother May I Waver era is over. The classrooms of America should look different. The law should unleash a new era of innovation and achievement. It should mean more stability in education policy, less politics, more education, and the new law says that the Secretary can't put those mandates back through a federal regulation. Now, last week at a hearing, I reminded the new Secretary of Education that Congress agrees with Humpty Dumpty in Through the Looking Glass. Humpty Dumpty said, "When I use a word, it means just what I choose it to mean, neither more nor less." Like Humpty Dumpty, Congress chose our words carefully because we know that if the Secretary doesn't implement the law the way Congress wrote it, the law isn't worth the paper it's printed on. Things won't look different in your classrooms, just as Congress envisioned and just as you and Lily and I demanded. Now, there are a lot of Tennesseans here. Some of them know that when I was governor, Tennessee became the first state to pay teachers more for teaching well. We raised taxes. We paid master teachers who voluntarily climbed a career ladder up to 70% more in their state salary. That produced some arguments with the NEA. So people assumed that when I got to Washington, D.C., that I would try to tell every state to do what Tennessee had done. Well, I didn't, and I won't, because I do not believe in a national school board. I know how hard it is to find fair ways to reward outstanding teachers, and the last thing you need when you're trying to do that is someone looking over your shoulder from Washington, D.C., second-guessing how you're trying to do it. So we fixed the law. Now let's fix the proposed accountability regulation that goes to the heart of the new law. It is true that the new law includes some guardrails to make sure states use federal dollars to focus on the lowest performing schools, on minority students, and students' disabilities. But let me tell you something. The new law also has some guardrails on the United States Secretary of Education to make sure he doesn't start dictating how you run your classroom. The deadline for comments on that regulation is August the 1st. So I hope you'll let the U.S. Education Secretary know this. The era of Washington knows best is over. And I hope you'll tell him, Mr. Secretary, keep your hands off my classroom. No more national school board. No more Mother May I waivers. No more telling me how to evaluate my teaching and whether my school is succeeding or failing. I hope you will remind the Secretary that the new law, which in the Senate got 85 out of 100 votes, says that the path to higher standards, better teaching, and real accountability is through classrooms, communities, and states where decisions are made by people closest to our children and not through a distant department in Washington, D.C. And I hope you'll tell him that you expect him to implement the new law the way you and Lily helped Congress write it and pass it. Thank you very much.
Lily, thank you so much. She is such an amazing leader for everyone in this room and for educators across the country, and I want you to give her a huge round of applause. Thank you. And I want to thank Kim Meade, who is here representing my home state as president of the Washington Education Association. This is my state over here. Lamar, they were louder than yours. My home state is doing such a great job, and I love their passion and commitment. It motivates me every single day to fight on your behalf in what we call the other Washington. Great to have you here. And to everyone here today, what a huge crowd. You are the heart and soul of education in America. Thank you for everything you do for all the children in our country. And it is truly an honor for me to be here today with my fellow friend of education, Senator Lamar Alexander. Can we give him one more round of applause? Tennessee, this is your chance. As all of you know, he is the first Republican to receive this award since 1984. Now, many of us in this room usually don't approve of Republicans winning anything, but I am really glad you made an exception for Lamar. He has been a truly fantastic partner in our work for students across the country, and he understands, like I do, the values of the voices and perspectives of our teachers and paraeducators in this country and across the country, as we all know. You know, when Lamar and I sat down at the start of 2015 to talk about our goals and priorities for this Congress, the scene had actually been set for this half a century earlier. In 1965, the NEA's first friend of education, President Lyndon Johnson, returned to his old elementary school that he once attended to take an important step in his war on poverty. At a picnic table on the lawn of the school, he signed into law the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, known as the SEA. Our nation had long claimed the ideal of education for all, but on that day in 1965, President Johnson actually signed that value into law, what he called, quote, full educational opportunity as our first national goal. ESEA was at its heart a civil rights bill. It aimed to close the education gaps between rich and poor and black and white and kids from rural areas and kids from our big cities. And it was a response to President Johnson's understanding that our country, and I quote, could never rest while the door to knowledge remained closed to any American. ESEA helped crack that door open for millions of Americans over the past 50 years. But as Marian Wright Edelman said in this room when accepting the Friend of Education Award in 2004, the work isn't over. And opening that door of equal education wide remains the great unfinished business of our nation. Unfortunately, as you all know, the latest attempt to pull that door open, No Child Left Behind, simply was not working. The intent was good, but no amount of good intent can overcome an education law not actually working where it matters the most, with our students, in our classrooms, and in our schools. So, when Lamar and I started our work, we knew it wouldn't be easy, especially in such a gridlocked and dysfunctional Congress, but we also knew if we worked together, made some compromises, and focused on reaching a result that would actually work for the students and parents and teachers we represented, we could do it. And more importantly, we knew we didn't have a choice. Our country needed to move past the broken law that was holding back our students and our teachers and our schools. We needed a new law, one that learned from the mistakes that were made in No Child Left Behind, the high-stakes testing that sucked creativity from our classrooms, the one-size one-size-fits-all approach, the unrealistic goals, the lack of resources to meet those goals, the punishments when they weren't met, the blaming of teachers and staff and principals who were doing nothing wrong, the letters telling parents that their school that they loved was failing when so many of them knew they weren't. In other words, we needed a new law that actually worked. We needed a new law that didn't depend on waivers that could be changed administration to administration or year to year, but one that also maintained the strong federal role that our students do deserve and that kept us moving towards the original goal of ESEA, that unfinished business, making sure every child in our nation has the opportunity to succeed, regardless of where they live or how they learn or how much money their parents make. As we wrote this new law, I was very focused on making sure it actually worked for those who would be asked to implement it. Some of my friends are sitting behind me today who came into my office with tears in their eyes. I knew it had to work for them. So I worked very hard to bring the voices of our teachers and paraeducators and make sure your voices and ideas and concerns were heard in this process. And I'm very proud that our new law, the Every Student Succeeds Act, reflects so many of our shared priorities and fixes so many of the problems with no child left behind. With your help, we reduced high-stakes testing and put in place a broader set of measures to help our states determine how their students are actually doing. We made it clear that while accountability matters and strong federal guardrails needed to be maintained, students and teachers should not be judged on test scores alone. We were able to fight off school vouchers that would have weakened public education, as well as the so-called portability proposals that would have siphoned money from schools with the highest concentration of students who live in poverty or that go to more affluent schools. We made it very clear that our new law could not undermine the collective bargaining agreements that teachers and paraeducators, including many of you, have fought so hard over the years to get. And for the first time ever, we made sure our nation's education law included dedicated funding for pre-kindergarten, a personal priority of mine. So I am proud of our new law, and all of you in this room have so much to be proud of as well. But all of us understand the work did not end on the president's desk, it just began. A law is only as good as its implementation. President Johnson understood this well. At that signing ceremony 51 years ago, he said the new education law needed to, quote, rekindle the revolution of the spirit against the tyranny of ignorance. And while he didn't say it outright, as a former teacher myself, I'm sure he understood that a law can provide the kindling, but teachers and paraeducators, like all of you in this room, are the ones we need to count on to spark the flame and keep that fire burning. As leaders in your classrooms, leaders in your schools, in your communities, your work continues now more important than ever. I fought to make sure your voices were heard as this law was written, and I'm going to keep fighting to make sure all of you in this room have a voice in it as it is implemented. I'm going to work to make sure that education remains that first national goal that President Johnson envisioned 51 years ago, and the door of equal education continues to open for our children wider every year. Now, as many of you may know or not know, it was actually education that got me into politics many years ago, fighting for my children's preschool program after a state legislator told me I was just a mom in tennis shoes who couldn't make a difference. I think I proved him wrong. I bet we've got a lot of moms in tennis shoes today and some dads who make a lot of difference every day. I went on from that moment to serve on my local school board and then my state senate, but before I ran for office ever, I taught in a preschool. And what I saw in that classroom all those years ago is what keeps me going today. The look in a child's eye when they learn something new, the pride that they exude when they figure out a problem, the way you can see them grow over the year and see them advance and see them take on new challenges. You know, on my last day of teaching in that preschool, my young students presented me with a very large quilt, 48 squares, each made by a different one of my kids. It's a beautiful patchwork of suns and smiles and scribbles, all wonderfully drawn in a bright, messy crayon. That quilt now hangs in my U.S. Senate office. And when I look at it on a daily basis, I remember the little hands that made up each patch. And I think about those heads with those big, curious minds and the responsibility we all felt to make sure they were leaving our classroom ready to succeed. One step closer to tackling life's challenges, seizing its opportunities, feeling that I know you all know so well, and one that I know drives all of us with education in our blood. Those of us who walked into classrooms understanding in our bones what last year's Friend of Education recipient, Malala Yousafzai, said so eloquently: one child, one teacher, one book, and one pen can change the world. I bet that everyone in this room has something like my quilt, a picture, a drawing, a face, a memory, something that reminds us that the choices we make in education today, the policies that we fight for to make sure that our students succeed, the work we do every day in the classroom and schools will set a course for our children and our country for years to come. So I'm here today to say thank you, all of you, for everything you do every single day in very tough environments to make sure our country is strong in the future. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.